Welcome on in, everybody. It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekly NFL live stream, this time for the Week 6 main slate. Going to go through a game-by-game analysis, talking through some of the injuries, potential stacks, the chalk, and of course, all of your live questions throughout the process. We've got ourselves a little glass of whiskey. Of course, it's a Friday evening. We've got some golf on tonight as well to sweat out. So overall, really looking forward to this weekend and, capping it off at the end with our Week 6 main slate. So let's go ahead, get this thing started. And what we're going to do for this iteration is actually bring up our projections. So, a lot of times I'm alluding to my projections, but this time going to actually go through them with you guys. So I'm going to be talking about each game specifically, but we'll be highlighting the quarterback, their ownership, going through some of the potential stacking options, which ones are going to be low owned, high owned as of right now. But these aren't going to be the end all be all, right? So that's why I'm willing to give you guys these projections on a Friday, because over Saturday and Sunday, as players are rolled in and out, we see the sentiment around the industry, some of the players that are getting steamed up by some of the popular betting shows, the ownership numbers, the projections are going to vary wildly, right? So if you want to be able to follow along throughout the weekend, get the most up-to-date information, make sure you join the Patreon page. That's enough for plugging, though. We have our projections up here, and let's get this thing rocking. So the first game I want to touch on is going to be the 49ers and the Falcons. So we're just going to go in order of the games that we have here on ESPN, dealing with a 44.5-point total between the 49ers and the Falcons, 4.5-point spread towards the 49ers side. From the injury perspective, the one huge question mark is Kyle Pitts, who is questionable for the Falcons. In terms of, just influential injuries, Nick Bosa is questionable, a game time decision for the 49ers. That could play a huge impact. But outside of Kyle Pitts, not really any fantasy relevant injury. So hopefully he's able to start for the Falcons, because I think it would make it a slightly more competitive game. You're talking about a relatively low over-under rate, 44.5 points. The one thing about the 49ers offense is that they're not going to score you, 50 to 55 points. They're not going to have a game total close to 50 to 55 points very often because of how much they run out the clock, right? When they're playing from ahead, their MO is to go out there, give Jeff Wilson Jr., or of course, whoever's their lead back at that point, 20 to 25 carries. They're going to give, when they're running with Trey Lance, carries through the quarterback. Now that they have Garoppolo, that's going to be a few more of the running backs getting carries. Oh, what is that sound? I don't know where that sound's coming from. It scared me a little bit. I guess it's a video up here. It scared the living heck out of me. I don't know what that was. Anyways, sorry guys. I don't know if you heard that sound. I have everything muted. I was like, what was that sound? I think I must have highlighted something and hit say it out loud. Either circumstance, right? You're talking about a game here where you're not going to run away, right? The 49ers aren't going to win this by 30 points. Jeff Wilson Jr. isn't going to get you 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Mariota, he might have a pretty good buyback option there. So if anything, I'm kind of looking at the Falcons more than anything, maybe one-offs for the 49ers players. I just don't see this being all that attractive of a game. So we'll talk through a few of the plays now. Let's go through the projections. So in terms of the quarterbacks, they're obviously important to talk about. You have Garoppolo here is in the mid-tier range. His name's a little bit too big, so let's make this a little bit bigger here. $5,500. I have him 2.4% owned. Projecting for right around 3x value. Pretty average for a quarterback. Now, he's around a chalky option like a Geno Smith, but I don't think he's a solid pivot, right? We're going to talk about this Seahawks versus Cardinals game a little bit later. It's the second highest total on the entire slate. He's probably worth being 5 times his own. So Garoppolo, I don't know if he's the best pivot to get to. Whereas Marcus Mariota, $200 cheaper. He's in that same sort of level of ownership, same sort of projection, but kind of like I was alluding to, that offense could actually have to do it all through the air, right? If they're playing from behind, if they're getting their ass whooped by the 49ers, which is kind of what I expect to happen here. The 49ers are just a better team, even without Nick Bosa out there. But without Bosa, Marcus Mariota could have a little bit more success through the air, right? Not have to worry about the threat of the pass rush, be able to hit some of the wide receivers a little bit more often. Aguilar at running back, they have Patterson out. So you're going to have a little bit of value at that position. So let's go through it. So what is his ownership? I know he's getting a little bit of steam there because he's cheap. Yeah, so he's only 1.3% owned. I'm only projecting him for 8.4 points, though. So it's not like his projection is through the roof. Not like an Eno Benjamin, right, who I've projected for 18 fantasy points, 4x value the last time I checked. Just ridiculous stuff from Eno Benjamin. But I like the wide receivers. Drake London, of course, is your wide receiver one here. Drake London is $5,400. So relatively cheap, projecting for nearly 2.5x value, which isn't jumping off the board like a Tyler Lockett, but he's also not 21% owned, right? Tyler Lockett is among the chalkiest plays on the slate. He's still questionable at this point, but expected to be able to suit it up this weekend. A good pivot would perhaps be able to take Drake London on a one-off, right? Assuming that they're playing from behind, that they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more often than that game script than most. Or if you're going with the stacking option, maybe assuming that Mariota is going to have to pass from behind, try and keep it a competitive game. You use Drake London as your wide receiver one, right? He's not that expensive, $5,400 for what he brings to the table and has to this point of the year, I think is more than doable. Let's see a few other options against San Francisco. So we're just talking about the Falcons right now. Let's see, you got to go way down the board. So San Francisco right here, Olamide Zaccheaus is $4,000, 1.1% owned. Probably not my favorite play. And I guess that's, yeah, I only have it filtered to players projecting for more than 5 fantasy points. So I guess that's it we have there. And then, of course, we talked about Kyle Pitts a little bit. Actually, it's behind this little window I have. I don't know if I can move it. Hold up. Is it still showing it? Okay, perfect. It's still showing it over there. Now I can get to the tight end tab. There was a little bit of a StreamYard thing in the way there. It wasn't letting me zoom in on it. Kyle Pitts right now have for 8.6% ownership, which is pretty high, right? But it's not as high as a Tyler Higbee. I think he's a better play than Tyler Higbee, especially if you can get rid of this Q tag. As of right now, considering the risk of him not playing, I have him projected for right around 10 fantasy points. If he's cleared, doesn't have an injury designation going into Sunday, that would most likely rise to right around like 11 fantasy points, like 10.7 to 11 fantasy points, I would assume, because it's accounting for right around a 15 to 20% chance that he doesn't play right now, which might actually be a little bit low. He's a game time decision. He's still questionable after a Friday, so maybe I'm a little bit too bullish on his chances to play there. But in either circumstance, I think that he's cheap enough at $4,200. We know Mariota is cheap. If you're playing Drake London as your third option there on a stack, I mean, you're saving an incredible amount of salary. And we know Mariota brings a little bit of rushing upside to the table, so he could go out there, score a touchdown on the ground. We also know that Drake London has got a ton of targets through the air. And Kyle Pitts, he's kind of the question mark. He's been questionable, a little bit skittish to this point in terms of his ability. Has the upside, has the athletic ability to go out there and spike. So I got to like it for sure. Josh says Pitt hasn't scored in the U.S. yet. How is he a better play than Higbee? I mean, just from a pure talent perspective, I mean, going into the year, they weren't even comparable plays. You're reacting to a 5-week sample size, right? I'm looking at the long-term perspective, the numbers from last year, for example, and considering that a guy like Pitts is also injured and returning from injury, right? In the preseason, he wasn't seeing many snaps. He's still getting acclimated to the offense. He's a brand new quarterback this year. I'm not just looking at game logs. That's why, Josh. You always say some smart-ass things, Josh, so I'm actually going to ban you for life. Sorry, not sorry, boss man. You've said some completely clown shit in the past. I'm not going to miss you. I'm not going to miss you, buddy. But anyways, have a great night, buddy. I hope you have a good time. You always say some fuckboy shit, so you're going to get out of here. Either way, though, I do like Kyle Pitts. He has a lot more yard after catch ability than somebody like a Tyler Higbee. He's lower owned than a Tyler Higbee. And to be quite frank with you, they're going to run all over that Panthers defense. They can't stop a plug for their life against the run. They're going to be playing from ahead, and Tyler Higbee isn't going to see a ton of targets in a game where they're just mopping their opponent. I mean, PJ Walker at quarterback, are we really expecting that to be a competitive game? Whereas the perfect game script here for a Falcons team playing from behind. So respectfully, I guess, honestly, I'm not even going to be respectful because you're a little brat about some of the stuff that you say. Josh, it's not the first time. You've said some stuff in the past, right? You're a repeat offender. It's not like it's your first time here. Respectfully, I disagree with you there. Let's move on to the other side of this game where I do think that there's a little bit of an onslaught risk here where you might just want to take one-offs from the 49ers, not so much stacking up the Falcons side, which I haven't even decided if I'm going to do it. I just wanted to talk through what you could do with Marcus Mariota. It's not even something that I'm sure I'm going to get to this week, to be quite frank with you. I just wanted to talk through the thought process there. I do think that a few one-offs there make sense, particularly like a Drake London. One of my favorite plays, particularly if Kyle Pitts is out with that injury. He's just going to get an even larger target share there. It'd be a great one-off option. Or you might even be able to do a little bit of a 1-and-1 stack, right? Where you're just taking one piece of each side. Most notably, if running back like Jeff Wilson Jr., right, $6,200, who's projecting through the roof in terms of his projection, 2.5x value, which isn't quite what Ramondre Stevenson is projecting for, which as of right now, my projections have Damian Harris out. So somebody who I think is probably closer to out than questionable, like he's listed right now. But still, if he's going to be 3 times less owned, Jeff Wilson Jr. is not 3 times less likely to get to a ceiling than Ramondre Stevenson. Now, if you're playing cash, you absolutely want to play Stevenson because he has the higher median projection. It's also going to be chalkier, which for a cash contest is kind of what you're looking for, right? Whereas a Jeff Wilson Jr. might not perform to the median quite as often as a Stevenson, but he still has plenty of that top end upside, particularly if they go out and they mop the Falcons, which, like I said, I think the 49ers are going to handedly win this game. And if that's the case, Jeff Wilson Jr. is going to see even more carries. Their MO, especially without Trey Lance, is just to give the ball to the running backs, right? If Trey Lance was there, they're going to funnel some of that rushing attack through Trey Lance. But now that he's out of the picture, I think that guys like Jeff Wilson Jr. Are all lights ahead, especially because he's been really effective per rush to this part of the season, an effective offensive line and the favorites here. So I don't think that should surprise anybody. Deebo Samuel is always an option when you're looking at the 49ers. I mean, you'd be remiss not to talk about him. $7,200. I just worry that it's not competitive enough a game to get him to like 30 fantasy points, because when you're investing in one of these $7,000 options, you're looking for a true ceiling. And it's not like Cooper Kupp where you're expecting like 30, 35 fantasy points anytime that you play him. You still have to get 25 plus points to really justify playing these sort of players in a large field GPP. Now, if you're in a cash lineup or a smaller single entry 2 to 3 max, you can get away with not quite that much of a ceiling, right? So these sort of players are a little bit easier to get to. But if you're going to take them in a large field GPP, you're taking a gamble on them having a true ceiling performance. And in this scenario here, where it's the 49ers and the Falcons, I'm not so sure that a Deebo Samuel has that kind of upside. So that's what I have to say about that game. Just in general, I think that there is upside to taking a Marcus Mariota stack. I'm not sure if I'm going to get there myself. You have to pay attention to Kyle Pitts, whether he's active or not. And the main target I like here, I think my favorite play, the one that I'm definitely going to have the most exposure to is Jeff Wilson Jr. I expect him to get a ton of rushes in this sort of game script against a relatively porous rushing defense there in Atlanta. And guys like Deebo Samuel may be a little bit overrated, right? So he's still getting ownership. You can see I have him at 11.6% at this point. So it's not like he's mega chalk out there, but you still have to play 25, maybe 30% in your player pool to get leverage to the field. And it's just something that I'm not sure if I'm going to be willing to get to myself. So let's see. Yeah, Martin says gone just like that. Yeah, dude, exactly. I mean, it's easy enough to do, right? Like if you're going to be a jackass and like constantly say things that are clownish like that, like what do you think's going to happen, right? So yeah, he's gone. Not going to miss him, right? I'm giving out projections for free right now, and he just got blocked, right? Hey, it's his loss. He's not going to get these projections. Let's move on into the next game, though. One that's a little bit more exciting now. Actually, it's not even that much more exciting, to be frank with you. It's the Patriots at the Cleveland Browns. Could be a little bit of a weather situation. Anytime we're in Cleveland, we're going to have to keep an eye on the forecast. So it's a little bit early to be looking at it, but something we'll probably revisit on Sunday morning, perhaps even Saturday night. But a relatively low total, 43 points, close spread, 2.5-point favorites on the Brown side. As of right now, we do have Mac Jones, who's questionable. So they have not given too much information on his injury, which is so Bell Belichick-like. If he doesn't start, you're going to have Zappy once again playing quarterback there. And on you also have Jacoby Myers questionable, Nelson Aguilar questionable, and Jonnu Smith. So 3 of their skill position players are also up in the air when it comes to their availability. And on the other side with the Cleveland Browns, we have Clowney, who's out already. Denzel Ward, their best defensive back, who's out. And that's it from the injury side. Not really any fantasy relevant injuries from the Browns side, but 2 of their best players in general, Clowney and then Denzel Ward, will not be playing. So when I'm taking a look at the projections here, trying to figure this out, it's a relatively low total game. I really don't see it shooting out. I mean, I have Mac Jones projected as the quarterback right now, which is more than likely what's going to happen. He's trending towards playing, was the last report that I saw there. He's relatively low owned, but I'd rather play Kenny Pickett. I'd much rather play a Daniel Jones. I'd rather play Marcus Mariota, who we just talked about, because they bring rushing upside to the table. I mean, he's coming back from a lower leg injury. It's not like he's going to be going out there and putting his body on the line. You're also going against a team that loves to run the ball, run out the clock. Not really a game environment that's conducive to a shootout or that sort of thing. So I don't love Mac Jones. On the other side of things, right, you can't really love Jacoby Brissett, right? Was he $5,400? He brings a little bit more rushing upside to the table, but we know when they get down within the 5-yard line, it's the Nick Chubb or the sometimes Kareem Hunt show. Kareem Hunt's a little bit more versatile, so if they're trying to mix it up with the passing attack, they're going to give Kareem Hunt a few touches down there too. In other circumstance, he's not rushing in touchdowns like a few of these other guys, like a Mariota. Kenny Pickett ran in multiple touchdowns his first ever start, or Daniel Jones, who has obvious rushing upside. So it's not my favorite game to get to stacks. And we're looking at one-offs. Ramondre Stevenson is going to be mega chalk, and I understand it, right? He's going against the Cleveland Browns. I honestly think the Browns win this game handedly. I think that they're going to take control of this game, run it out with Nick Chubb, and I don't understand the Ramondre Stevenson chalk, because it's not like he's just going to get there at $6,000. He still has to post you 20 fantasy points. I'd say at least 15, right, to be neutral in a large field GPP when it comes to your score. And to get there, they have to have somewhat of a positive game script, right? I know the Vegas line is 2.5. I just don't agree with that. I would take the Brown side all day. And I was a believer in the Patriots going into the year, but after seeing and watching a lot of their games, I'm not as convinced as I was before. And now all of a sudden, the Browns are being treated like they aren't a great team. I mean, I've seen the Browns too. The Browns have impressed me to this point. So it's not a line that I agree with. And a lot of the exposure and the ownership out there agrees with the Vegas line, which is usually what we see. We see a lot of correlation between Vegas lines and then a lot of the ownership and exposure that people get in DFS, which a lot of times is sharp action. But sometimes, when you don't agree with that sort of game script, you have to act accordingly. And here, it's probably going to lead me to fade Ramondre Stevenson, who to this point, guys, has been like a darling of the channel. If you've been on the Patreon, you've seen that he's been in my player pool every single week. And, outside of week 1 has really paid off and handsomely. He scored a bunch of touchdowns. He's been trending in the right direction. Obviously, we got a few ceiling performances the last 2 times out. That's why now everyone wants to own him. But I was owning him when he was like $5,100 and he was like 2% owned, right? It's a completely different scenario now. It's kind of like a golfer. I do a lot of golf DFS if you haven't seen that content, where somebody goes out there, he finishes in the top 5, top 10, pays off for us. And then all of a sudden, he's a lot more expensive and he's chalk going into the next golf tournament, especially when it's as volatile as what you have with golf. You have to fade him. And in this sort of game environment, I just see all too many avenues for him to bust. To play him, because if he's 30% owned, you got to put him in at least half of your lineups to get leverage there. So it's just something that I'm not comfortable doing. And as a result, it is going to be a fade for me. Looking at the other side, I mean, Nick Chubb's expensive, $8,200. That's going to lower his ownership drastically. I mean, when you're choosing between CMC and then Chubb up top, and a low total game with Chubb, and I know it's not a great game script against the Rams either. That's why you only have 7% for both of those guys up top. So they're not going to get a bunch of attention. I mean, if you're looking to take a low-owned flyer, I guess play Nick Chubb, but I understand it. What is Kareem Hunt's price? Let's see, $5,700. That intrigues me a little bit more because we've seen it already a few times this season where he just vultures all of the touchdowns. We know that he brings a lot more receiving upside to the table. I was going to say rushing. That's not true. Nick Chubb's the rushing back. We got the receiving upside here for Kareem Hunt. That's the side I have to be on here. So that's my take on this whole game, to be honest. The wide receivers, I almost have like no interest. I know that Jacoby Myers is questionable, probably not going to be playing. So that opens up a little bit more. Nelson Aguilar is questionable. I guess Hunter Henry, like he's like super cheap at this point, right? So where is he at? Hunter Henry, $3,100. If you think he can score a touchdown, right, then play Hunter Henry, right? He's only 5% owned. You can easily get leverage there. On the other side of things, I guess Amari Cooper's okay. He's been seeing quite a few targets. I think he's underrated because of people just downgrading the team in general because of Jacoby Brissett. He gets a negative rap, and I don't think it's necessarily warranted. So $5,900, he's not projecting off the board by any means. I'm just pointing out the guys that are in this game, right? I don't like it in general. I told you to begin. I'm not stacking it. I can tell you right now. I don't love Nick Chubb's price, and honestly, don't love a lot of the cheap options either. I guess Hunter Henry would be the one guy that I'd consider there the most. Let's move on to the next game. We're not going to spend too much time on these shitty games. Another one I'd classify as a pretty shitty game. It's going to be the Jets at the Packers. So it's a 45.5 point total. You have a 7.5 point spread favoring the Packers. So they're expecting a beatdown. And I don't necessarily agree with the beatdown sentiment because Zach Wilson has been a lot more productive, a lot more efficient than people want to give him credit for. So I think that there's that angle to this game. I don't know if I'd want to stack Zach Wilson, though, because, first off, stingy Green Bay defense. We know that. They're at least a top 10 unit in the NFL. Time will tell if they're actually a top 5 unit, which is something that I think that they have the upside for. But I don't think that Green Bay is a team that you can target because you have 2 running backs that vulture each other. Aaron Rodgers hasn't been that effective to this point of the year. I think a lot of that is due to the wide receivers. You just have to hope that one guy gets concentrated usage on the Packers, and I just don't see it happening. So it's not a game that I love targeting, to be frank with you. On the other side, like I mentioned, the Zach Wilson has upside, but it's not like I'm going out there and rushing to stack him. So let's go through the ownership here, right, to give you an idea. So Zach Wilson is 2.3% owned, so relatively low owned there. You have a relatively cheap Aaron Rodgers, so he's only $6,100. But he's 5% owned, so he's getting a little bit of attention there. So he's not nearly a leverage play because when you consider that Patty Mahomes is only 5.8% owned, 4.9% on Aaron Rodgers doesn't look quite as low anymore, right? So I can't wait to talk about this game later, by the way. This Patty Mahomes, Josh Allen matchup is going to be a fun one to break down, and I have an interesting take on how to take down that game. So we'll talk about it later. But let's go through some of the periphery options on this team. So in terms of stacking, again, I'm not a huge fan of going to a Zach Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers. So neither of them is likely to be in my player pool. But in terms of options you could take as a one-off, I think that Garrett Wilson is worth a few looks. Also Elijah Moore. Both are relatively cheap. So Elijah Moore is $4,900. And what is Garrett Wilson? He's more expensive, right? Yeah, he's got to be more expensive. Yeah, $5,000. So they're pretty much at the same price tag. Garrett Wilson's a little bit higher owned. He's a little bit more than twice as owned as an Elijah Moore. I think they're both great plays. If you want to mix them in as a one-off, I understand it. On the other side of things, it's just hard to take either running back because they just eat into each other's production so much. Up top, you got a high price tag on Aaron Jones, $7,600. There's next to no chance that I'm getting there. And I know he has the upside. It's just that if you score one touchdown, right, A.J. Dillon goes out there, just vultures one touchdown, that takes you out of the GPP winning lineup, right? Unless the Packers win this by like 3-4 touchdowns. And I just don't see that happening. The Jets have a pretty solid rushing defense. In general, I think they're a better team than people are giving them credit for. I can't get to much in this game, right? I mentioned Elijah Moore. I mentioned Garrett Wilson. Allen Lazard as a one-off. You're really starting to fish here, right? You have Randall Cobb's $4,400. Is Allen Lazard playing? Is the question. He's been injured. He might not be playing. I think he's out. I'm going to confirm that. I'm like 90% sure he's out now. No, looks like he's still playing. I guess he's just not on my projections, or he's cheaper than I'm expecting. I don't know. Either way, if he's playing, I guess I understand the play, but in general, I don't like this game, right? It's one that I'm avoiding. I don't think that it has that shootout potential that at least 3 or 4 other games on the slate have. So just in general, right? If there's a few one-offs at wide receiver that you like, go ahead and take them. If you think that one of those Packer running backs is capable of getting all of the usage, then I guess go to them. But they're still getting attention, right? They're still getting usage around the industry. So you're not getting some mega low-owned pivot. Next game we're talking about is the Jaguars at the Colts. A little bit more intriguing because the Colts have shown a susceptibility on defense, right? They've gone knocked off a few times by inferior teams. They've been in shootouts with teams that have had no business of even making it a competitive game. And then you have the Jaguars that have looked so good on certain weeks, and then the next week have looked like one of the worst teams in all of the NFL. So they look like a young team, right? Inconsistent. They're going to have weeks where they really show that talent and that upside, and they're going to get run over other weeks. So the huge question marks here lie with injuries. So Jonathan Taylor is questionable. Same thing with Nyheim Hines. That's a situation that is kind of muddied at this point. We don't really know who's going to be active. If Jonathan Taylor is active, I would imagine that he's slightly limited. And to this point of the year, he hasn't been all that productive. So I'm not a huge fan of Jonathan Taylor. Let's look at his ownership over here, which, he's expensive. We know that, $8,000. He's only 7% owned. All three of these guys up top, they're overpriced and they're in negative situations, right? With Taylor, the game script's great. If he was 100% healthy, we'd be all over Jonathan Taylor here. But he has that huge injury question mark. And then Nick Chubb and Christian McCaffrey are in negative game scripts, games that I think they're going to lose. It's hard to get to these three guys up here. So running back's likely a position where I love Leonard Fournette against my Steelers. I hate to say it. I think Leonard Fournette is going to go off against us. There's a few of these like 7K options that I like quite a bit more, or just punting or taking value picks at running back. There's quite a few spend up wide receivers that make sense. So we're looking at Jonathan Taylor. I mean, Nyheim Hines, actually, I think I have him projected out. Yeah, I have Nyheim Hines projected out. But if, Jonathan Taylor is out, Nyheim Hines, if he's active, is going to be somebody we have to take a look at. So I would consider that end of the spectrum. In terms of, this is going to get me in trouble here. Trevor Lawrence, I feel like every time I play him, he goes out there and sucks. He posts like a single digit performance. Every time I fade this guy is when he goes out there and he balls out. So I'm going to play him this week, but just, have that little bit of a disclaimer there that I don't seem to get this guy right all that often. The Colts have just shown too much weakness. Even though this is a 42-point over-under, I think I have to get to Trevor Lawrence because he brings rushing upside to the table. His pass catchers also have quite a bit of potential there too. So, Trevor Lawrence, right, super low owned, only 1.5%. Let's go to the wide receivers. This is where I start to get a little bit excited. So you have Christian Kirk, who's $5,800. Now he's getting a little bit of attention, surprisingly. So even though it's only 1.5% on Trevor Lawrence, he's 9.3% owned. But you could get there. You have Zay Jones. Zay Jones is questionable at this point, so we're not sure if he's going to play. But if he does, I think he's a pretty great option. At running back, Travis Etienne is starting to get more and more touches with this team. So where's Travis Etienne? Right here, $5,000. I'm starting to project him for double-digit points, right? And just a few weeks ago, it was closer to 8. He's starting to get more and more of that usage there. Used quite a bit as a receiver out of the backfield, and only 2.9% owned. So I mentioned the Trevor Lawrence stack. I'm not sure if I'm going to get there, but, taking Etienne as a one-off or getting to a Kirk or a Zay Jones if he plays are things that I'm highly going to consider, particularly on the other side. When I'm not playing Matt Ryan stacks, I just refuse to do it. He's geriatric, old, washed up at this point, 2.1% owned. I don't care if he throws it 60 times. It's just not something I can't substantiate. It's getting cute at that point. That's what I would say. There's such thing as differentiating, taking low owned stacks. And then there's such things as just being foolish, right? And I took a shot on Matt Ryan early in the season, hoping that he could show us a little bit of promise. And he's only shown us just ducks. He does not have the arm talent anymore. And it's not like the mental game is at a point where he can carry himself with his acumen out there. So for me, $5,300, it's going to be a hard pass. You do have a little bit of guys like Doolin, who's getting a little bit of ownership. So let's go to Doolin. He's towards the bottom of the board. He was getting way more ownership than I would have expected. Where's Ashton Doolin, my guy? All right, I passed him. Alec Pierce, right, 9.1% owned. He's getting some ownership too. He was the one I was thinking about. He's the one who's getting steamed up a little bit, so he's starting to see a little bit more usage. When you have Matt Ryan throwing you the ball, I'd rather take shots on guys with similar sort of projections, maybe a little bit lower projections, right? But 3-4 times less ownership in this $4,000 range, right? So we're going to go through a few later on, but just to give you an idea, at that same price tag. Like KJ Osborne, for example, he's got bigger play upside than an Alec Pierce. And to get to 15 to 16 fantasy points, these sort of players are going to have to go out there and put up a big play. They're not going to get 10 targets, post you 8 catches and 100 yards. That's just not the rule on offenses. I mean, for everybody in this range, right? They're all number 2, maybe even number 3 wide receivers, for their teams, they're going to have to go out there and get you that big play upside, which means if they're going to be chalky in that range, I'm more than likely going to be fading you. So we have that. Tight end position is kind of made for this game too. Usually I'm trying to target value tight ends when it's in a higher scoring game. So again, we're not going to take too much time on these crappy games. Let's move on to the next one. A game with a lot more promise, and one that may end up stacking on the Minnesota side is the Vikings at the Dolphins. So we know Tua's rolled out. He's not going to be playing this week. Teddy Bridgewater is also questionable at this point. So you might have Skylar Thompson playing quarterback. And in fact, if we look at my projections here, I do have Skylar Thompson listed as my quarterback right now. They're at $5,000, but it might end up being Teddy Bridgewater. We'll have to see what ends up happening with that injury situation. But we're dealing with a 45-point over-under, a 3-point spread favoring the Vikings, which has this as a relatively competitive game, which I agree with. And I think the team to target here is the Vikings. And they're always a favorite for me, mostly because of their style of offense. They're extremely concentrated. They have Cousins, Cook, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and Irv Smith Jr. KJ Osborne is sometimes a factor in the game, more often than not, completely excluded from the game. Typically, you're running with those 4 skill position players, and even Irv Smith Jr., sometimes kind of like a KJ Osborne, is sometimes pushed out of the mix, which means when you're trying to make Kirk Cousins stacks, sure, you include the KJ Osbornes, you include, some of those guys like an Irv Smith Jr., but you play them like 10 to 15%. If you're playing 35% of your lineups as Kirk Cousins stacks, which would be a little bit aggressive, right? I'm not advocating for that. You can play a vast majority of them just stacking up the Justin Jeffersons, the Cooks, going to both a Jefferson and a Thielen in that same sort of lineup. And because they funnel so many of their targets, so much of their usage to the same few players, it pays off, and he's 3.9% owned. So, and he's projected for nearly 20 fantasy points because of how effective both of these offenses are. So it's not even just because of how much I like the Vikings offense in general. It's also the fact that Miami should keep this competitive. They have a highly efficient offense that goes out there and is able to score a lot of points as well. And even without Tua, I don't know if it's that big of a drop off, right? I've been talking shit about Tua for quite some time. Teddy Bridgewater, if he's playing, I think that's a huge upgrade for their offense. So I like the game in general. So let's look at some of the ownership numbers, see who's chalk. Dalvin Cook, $7,500. He's 7.5% owned. On the other side of the ball, you have the 2 running back situation. So, of course, Raheem Mostert also... Chase Edmonds is rumored to get more targets this week, so we'll have to see about $5,700. What is Edmonds' price at this point? He's got to be down there. $4,800. Yeah. He's hardly even above 5 points, so he hardly even made the spreadsheet when it comes to projection. The word on the street down here in Miami is that Edmonds is going to start to get more involved. I don't know if I buy it, though, right? So in terms of the running backs on the Dolphins, it's probably a pass for me. Wide receiver targets a little bit more intriguing. Tyreek Hill is always in consideration for a buyback. We've seen him do that 30, 40 times in his career. I mean, I don't even know. We've lost count at this point quite a bit ago. Jalen Waddle should place $6,200. He was injured over the last few weeks. Was able to tough it out, but was definitely hampered by it. You could see in his numbers that he wasn't quite himself. But $6,200, he's only 3.6% owned. So maybe some of that lack of production has kept people off of him, which I think as a one-off makes him an exceptional piece to take in this game, especially if you're just looking to get one piece of the game. Because if he goes off, no one's going to think to just take Jalen Waddle as a one-off, right? Most people's exposure to him is going to be as a buyback for a Kirk Cousins stack, which I will have exposure to. Or perhaps if you're trying to stack up a Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson, if you want to go that direction, a lot of people are going to get their exposure that way. A good way to maybe get leverage on the field is to take them as a one-off, right? Actually, just take them as your one piece from that game. So I think that's it for that game. I like the Kirk Cousins side a little bit more in terms of stacking options. Doolin's on IR. Okay, yeah. So yeah, it was Pierce I was talking about. Yeah. And Alex says start Knox or Pitts in Najee or CEH. So Pitts might not play, and I love the game environment for Knox. I called him Russell Knox. That's a golfer, right? For Dawson Knox. I like that game environment. It's got Josh Allen throwing him the ball. I definitely have to side towards Knox there, particularly because Pitts is injured. So even if he plays, he might be a little bit hampered there. Your other one is Najee versus CEH. Najee's in a horrible game script against one of the best rushing defenses in all of the NFL. I guess the real argument here, because CEH is in the other side of that game, right? So if you played Knox and CEH, you're getting a little bit of correlation between those two players. But I'm assuming this is for a season-long fantasy league, so it's not really that much of a concern. So you're really trying to bet on whether Najee's going to get targets out of the backfield. And the one thing I'd say to kind of push back against that, and why I'd kind of steer you towards CEH, is Najee Harris is dealing with Jalen Warren emerging. He's looked better than Najee Harris. He's averaging more yards per carry. He's also looked more efficient as a receiver out of the backfield. You've heard Mike Tomlin actually say in some of his press conferences over the last week, he said it this week, he said it last week as well, that Jalen Warren's going to see more and more targets, more and more touches in the offense. Yeah, I'd play CEH. Just better game script. They're going to be in a competitive game at the very least. That's for sure. So thank you for letting me know about that, Travis. Yeah, it's Pierce. So he's going to get more targets because Doolin's on IR. Michael Pittman has been hampered by injury ever since he missed that game. So yeah, I guess that's why he's emerging. I guess that's why people are getting to Alec Pierce. It's Alec Pierce, right? Rookie. You'll worry about that a little bit. And Travis says Dalvin is starting to cook. That is for damn sure. Last week I didn't play him, and I regretted that. That guy made me he taught me. Let's just say that he taught me last week. Let's go to the next game though. So we talked to the Vikings and the Dolphins. Let's go over Cincinnati heading to New Orleans, which another low total game, and I promise they're not low total games. We're going to be going through the Ravens and Giants, which I like quite a bit. We'll be going through the Arizona-Seattle game, which is the second best game on the slate, and we're saving Buffalo and the Chiefs for last. We're saving the best for last, that's for sure. That's going to be an absolute banger. But looking at the total here between the Bengals and Saints, it's a 43.5 point over-under, 2.5 point spread favoring the Bengals side. Injury concerns for both teams. So you have T. Higgins, who's questionable. That whole fiasco in primetime cost people a lot of money, so including myself. So if you have a personal vendetta against Higgins, you're not alone out there. Hayden Hurst is questionable, and on the other side, you have Jameis Winston still questionable. At this point, they think that Andy Dalton is going to start. That was the last report that we got, so I'm assuming that at this point. And we also have Marshawn Lattimore, cornerback for the Saints, that has been marked out. So in terms of the fantasy relevant players, I love Joe Burrow stacks. I am a sucker for playing them. And to this point of the year, it has not paid off all that often. And you're going against a stingy defense. The argument to be made is that he's by far the lowest owned guy up top, right? Now, the next lowest owned is a Patty Mahomes, who I absolutely love. He's probably my favorite play on the slate. We're going to talk about him later. But I also like into Joe Burrow because much like a Kirk Cousins, when that offense is firing in all cylinders, they usually funnel through just 1-2 players at the very most. You've seen games where it's like Joe Burrows to Higgins going off. You've seen games where it's Joe Burrow going to Jamar Chase and maybe one other wide receiver. And if T. Higgins is rolled out, you know I'm going to be playing Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase stacks, maybe using Hayden Hurst if he plays there too. Tyler Boyd is an adequate option if he's the number 2 wide receiver with Higgins out. And you can even use Joe Mixon at running back because of his receiving upside as a stacking option there too. So I think it's a underrated stack. The game total is not great, right? 43 fantasy points, but the Bengals let up points in bunches. If the Saints are able to score a little bit more than we expect, maybe they go out there and it's a little bit more of a shootout. On the other side, Alvin Kamara's relatively chalky, as you'd expect, $6,700, 12.5% owned. I think he's an okay buyback option. I wouldn't be stacking Andy Dalton, that's for sure. So Andy Dalton, $5,200. He's 1.8% owned, so he is a pivot, but not a pivot that I'm getting to. At wide receiver, we have question marks with Olave. He had the head injury last week, so he's questionable. We don't know if he's going to suit up. Michael Thomas has already been rolled out, so we know that he's not playing. And Jarvis Landry has also been rolled out. So, buyback options, not all that plentiful. But if there's one thing I know about the Saints is that when they're down wide receivers, they use Alvin Kamara out of the backfield like crazy. And on DraftKings in a full PPR format, that could be absolute fantasy gold. I mean, we've seen games where Kamara gets you like 10 catches, right? And scores multiple touchdowns, gets you 40 fantasy points from time to time. We've seen that from Kamara before against the Bengals defense, which is, it's okay, right? Shut down the Steelers, right? But that's not really saying much. You could put a team of 40-year-old geriatric people out there. They'd probably stop the Steelers. especially with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback. But they've lit up points too. So I think they are susceptible. And based on the lack of wide receivers, it makes guys like Alvin Kamara an even better play. Let's look at some of the Bengals options. So, Jamar Chase, only 7.1% owned. If Higgins is out, I would expect that ownership number to rise, but still makes him an even better play. So I'll be getting there. T. Higgins, right? Not sure whether he's going to play. We'll keep an eye on that. And where's good old Tyler Boyd? A little bit cheaper there. He has $5,100. If Higgins is out, I think he's a better play, as is probably not in non-consideration for my stacks. Let's move on to the next game. Trying to get these done relatively quick out here. Travis says, did you get a round in 2K23 yet? I did not. I wanted to. I have it downloaded, though, so it's all fired up and ready to go. I'm thinking tomorrow is probably the first time I'm going to play. So I'll let you know, Travis. But it's hyped. I see the Tiger Woods logo down there, and it just makes me want to play. It's especially because you can play as Tiger Woods. You can play as like Bubba Watson, those sort of players out there. That part of the game, I think I'm going to enjoy a lot, to be honest. Let's move on to the next game, though. It's got my whiskey. I've been talking so much. I'm forgetting about my whiskey over here. I have ambitions on finishing this by the end of the stream, so I got to get working on this a little bit. And now it's watered down. So now it's going to go down like water. So beware. It's going to come down fast, boys. The whole stream's going to come down fast, crashing down, burning. Anyways, let's move on to the next game. It'll be the Ravens going to the Giants. 5.5 point spread favoring the Ravens and a 45-point total. So another one of those average totals, right? 43 to 45 points. What you see for a majority of the games out here. And what I like about this game is both quarterbacks bring rushing upside to the table, and you could use them as a one-off stack. So what I like about this is taking a one-off stack like Daniel Jones and maybe Richie James Jr., right? Daniel Jones and then one other pass, maybe even Saquon Barkley, right, as your quote-unquote passing option with a Daniel Jones, or Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews stack, that sort of thing, and then running it back with one other player because, it's a 45-point over-under. I could see a solid amount of each team's production going to like that one player, right? Like a Saquon Barkley, or on the other side going to a Mark Andrews, for example. And people kind of neglecting this game in general because of the over-under, because, it's Daniel Jones. And I know they're 4-1. I mean, like, we should stop talking about them like they're a joke at this point. They have one of the best records in all of the NFL. We should maybe give this game a little bit more respect than people are giving it, right? It's got a relatively close spread, right? It's 5.5 points. Based on the fact that the Giants are 4-1, it probably should be closer than a 5.5 point spread. I think it's an underrated game. In terms of injuries, Rashad Bateman's out. Gus Edwards is out for the Ravens. On the other side, Kadarius Toney is out. You have Wan'Dale Robinson questionable, and most notably, in my opinion, Leonard Williams, defensive end, who's one of the best run stoppers in all of the NFL, is questionable. So if he's out, I think this is an underrated thing that people aren't going to really pick up on. J.K. Dobbins to the moon. You play him, he's going to average like 6 yards a carry. Lamar Jackson's probably going to get a lot more rushing upside there too. But when they're playing from ahead, they're just going to run it with just pure normal runs, right? Not ones where Lamar Jackson is improvising, going out there, getting rushing yardage. Just a pure rushing game with J.K. Dobbins, I expect to be extremely efficient. So I like getting to him as just a pure, one-off option in this game, not really going with any sort of stacking. If I'm stacking up the game, I love the Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews one-off stack with a Barkley buyback. That, it's an expensive stack, right? It's an expensive quarterback, top-end tight end, and a top-end running back. But that's what I mean by like this 45-point total. It could be like 2 touchdowns for Barkley, 2 touchdowns through Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson scoring like 30 fantasy points because he rushes for 1 or 2 touchdowns. Like that sort of game script, I think, is extremely viable, where it's a shootout between 2 teams essentially using the same players, kind of like in Madden, where you're just trying to juice up somebody's stats. It's like Lamar Jackson does that with Mark Andrews sometimes. And on the flip side, Saquon Barkley is by far the best player on that team. He's the reason why they're 4-1. They're going to use him like he's a Madden player too. So I like the game in general. We'll look at some of the player stats here in a second. Chris, though, says, I'm trying to trade Son in Robinson from the Jaguars for one of these players. Who would you pick? So you have Tyreek or Debo. So it's a 2-for-1, which I like. In general, I like unloading 2 players for one more often. You open up a waiver wire spot to try and make up some of that ground. That's why I like it so much. So let's see. Tyreek or Debo. You're not really going to do it matchup based, right? Because there's still so much left to the season. You're looking at it from a top level perspective. Debo is probably the more consistent player. Tyreek Hill might win you more weeks just based on him going for 30 to 40 fantasy points. So I would say, Chris, it depends on your objective. If you need somebody that's going to spike for you, win you a few fantasy weeks just based on his production, then go with Tyreek Hill. If you're looking for somebody to be a cornerstone, get you a 15 to 20 fantasy points almost every single week, that's Deebo Samuel. So I guess it's up to your ambitions there, your goals with that trade. But I like both trades for sure. Let's think about the game. Absolutely, Travis. I'm all for it. I'm not going to be very good. I'll just warn you. I haven't played much 2K in a while, but I'm all for it. And Travis says, let's go, enjoying whiskey. You tried some Bradshaw, not terrible. I haven't tried it. I have to add that to the list. This right here is a little bit of Four Roses, which I happen to like quite a bit. It's not inexpensive. It's a widely available brand, but it's what I like, right? Sometimes it doesn't have to be expensive for you to like it, right? If you have an acquired taste or something, why not enjoy it? Especially if it saves you a little bit of cash. That's what I'll say about that. Let's move on to the next game, though. Actually, before we do so, I want to look at some of the ownership numbers, right? I promised we'd do so. So let's look at Saquon. Right, so I like Saquon here. He's 14.4% owned, which I believe as of right now is up there. It might actually be, it's number 2 in terms of ownership at running back. So it's the most popular spend up option, but I understand it. I mean, he's not twice as likely to succeed as Dalvin Cook, but I'm going to play both of them, right? I'm playing 150 lineups, so I don't really have to think like that. But if you're playing a single entry, then sure. Like I like Dalvin Cook more because he's lower owned, but if you're playing more than one lineup, right, you could still play both running backs. So I don't really have to make that decision. But I like Saquon there. Let's look at Lamar Jackson. He's getting ownership, but he's expensive. He's 6.7% owned. That seems about right for him. And then Mark Andrews is definitely getting some ownership here, but it's not too much. You can see, actually, he went up from the last time that I looked at it, say 13.3%. That's still all right, though, right? You're playing 25% of your lineups, 30% of your lineups. That gets you the leverage that you need to the field. It's doable, right? It's not 20, 30% chalk. I think what we have over here for Ramondre Stevenson, right? This is when we get to a point where it gets hard to play the guy because then you got to play him in 50, 60% of your lineups. Just something that I'm just usually not willing to do unless I'm completely sold on a guy. So I don't know. I like the game in general and definitely some spots I'm getting to. The next game we're going to touch on, though, is unfortunate. I wanted to avoid this one as long as humanly possible. It is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is going to be as much of a shit show as you're going to see this week. Steelers are going to get destroyed. It is going to be an absolute ass whooping because first off, it's strength versus weakness for the Buccaneers defense versus our offense. And then our defense is horrible against the run going against a Tampa team that's amazing running the ball with Lenny Fernet. So I'm expecting Lenny Fernet here to just absolutely smash. So in terms of the over-under, it's 46 points, which is actually on the higher end of the spectrum for this week, and a 10-point spread, 9.5 points right now for the Buccaneers. So Vegas is expecting an ass whooping. I tend to agree with it, to be frank with you. And one of my best plays this week, somebody I'm going to have a lot of exposure to, maybe my top exposed play, is Lenny Fernet. Nearly 19 points is where I have his projection. That's only going to go up throughout the weekend. And he's only 13% owned. So I might play 50% of Leonard Fournette this week. I may just take a huge stance for him. Maybe it's mushing him, hoping that the Steelers can win, shut him down, but it's not going to happen. Like their rushing defense is non-existent. Leonard Fournette is just going to pound the rock down their throat. And I don't even like Tom Brady that much because the Steelers passing defense can get it done. Like, sure, against Josh Allen, they got murdered, but everyone gets murdered by Josh Allen. I have much more confidence in the rushing attack getting there for Tampa Bay. In terms of buybacks, I'm not really going to stack up Tampa Bay. So I'm probably not even taking many buybacks. If I was going to get to anyone as a one-off, it's always Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson in a PPR sort of format is a lot more valuable than anything else. And he's $5,700. He's only 9.7% owned. And if he brings you a touchdown, he can get you 22 to 25 fantasy points. And that's kind of all you really want at $5,700. So I'll be playing Deontay, a lot more interested in taking a Leonard Fournette more than anything. And perhaps even going to the Tampa Bay defense, right? So bringing this up over here, they're expensive. They're also, not being owned. They're 4.7% owned, which is half as owned as the Rams. I'd argue that going against Kenny Pickett, who's turnover prone, is almost as good as matchup as going against PJ Walker. And that it hurt me to say that right there. I have to say that. It hurt me to even have to admit that, but it's true, right? He's been turnover prone. He's done a lot of picks. He's probably prone to fumble because he's a rushing quarterback. It's a good situation for a defense. Let's just say that. I got a question here. Which two running backs should you trade in order to receive Lamb and Josh Allen? Okay. I don't know if you can get him with that team, to be quite frank with you. Yeah, I honestly, you'd have to give away Kamara for sure. And I don't know if you have enough trade equity to even get him. Yeah, to be frank with you, bro, I don't think you can even get CD Lamb and Josh Allen, right? Because you'd have to trade Kamara. We know that for a fact. Dameon Pierce isn't going to bring that much to the table. And I guess it would have to be Kamara and Mixon, right? Like you'd have to trade both of your stud running backs to get those two players because no one's giving away Josh Allen for nothing. They want an elite tier player for Josh Allen. I can guarantee you that. And then CD Lamb, he's a borderline wide receiver one. He was drafted as a wide receiver one. I don't know if you can get that. I don't know if you're going to be able to make a trade there that makes sense for you, to be honest, because I think you'd have to give away both of your running backs. Now, if you only gave away one of Kamara or a Mixon, then maybe you could trade him a Pittman. Like you could try and swing some sort of deal where, you're trying to ship off somebody like a Michael Pittman instead. But yeah, I don't know if you're going to be able to get something done there unless you're more creative, right? You might be more creative than me, be able to figure it out. But based on what I'm looking at there, I'm not sure if I see a trade that makes sense for you. Let's move on to this next game, though. We have the Panthers at the Rams, which is going to be an absolute doozy. You're going to get mega chalk on the Rams defense. You can see 8.4% owned right there. PJ Walker is going to be starting at quarterback for the Panthers, which God bless him. He's done it before, and he's looked like complete doo-doo out there at quarterback. So just, it's not going to be a good game. It's going to be a low-scoring game. It's a 41-point over-under. Vegas tends to agree with that. And it's a true 10-point spread for the Rams. So you had Akers, who's been rolled out. So we know that Darrell Henderson Jr. is going to be starting. That's the main real headline here because Henderson Jr. is also relatively cheap. So you can see he's only $5,100. And right now I only have him at 10.9%. There is zero chance that lasts. Darrell Henderson Jr. is going to be nearly as owned as Ramondre Stevenson. So it's 10.9% there. You have Stevenson at 29%. I think that they both maybe end up around 20%, right? So some of the ownership that was going to Stevenson as a value, I think is going to funnel to somebody like a Darrell Henderson Jr. who's also cheaper. And it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of the week that Henderson Jr. is the more expensive running back. So $5,100, I like him. I think it makes a lot of sense, but we're going to have to track the ownership, right? Because I like him at 10.9%. I don't like him if he's going to be 30% owned, right? So we'll have to come across that bridge. And likewise, if Henderson goes to 30% and somebody like a Stevenson goes down to 15% or 20% even, then maybe he comes a little bit more into play, right? So it's something that we're going to have to handle, especially considering that we have Eno Benjamin down here, who we haven't even talked about yet, who's projecting for 18 points. 4x value, right? So he's 26% owned. There's these three chalky running backs that we're going to have to address, and Henderson Jr. is likely to become the third of those chalky running backs. So we'll get to that at some point. The Panthers side, you have CMC. I mean, in this negative of a game script, he could still get there because of his receiving upside. So I don't think you have to completely eliminate him. Jonathan Taylor is out. I already told you I don't love Nick Chubb. Maybe I end up getting to CMC, playing him in 15 to 20% of lineups, but it's tough, right? He projects for 20 fantasy points. That's assuming that he has any sort of chance to get to a positive game script. It's going to be tough sledding. We'll have to see. I haven't removed him from my player pool yet, but it's not my favorite play. So it's not my favorite game in general. Let's move on to the next one. And these last two are absolute bangers. So this is going to be, next one is the Cardinals at the Seahawks. This is going to be my highest exposed game. The last one, the Bills and the Chiefs, we're going to talk about it. They're definitely players I'm going to be getting to. We'll talk about them 100%. But this is the game I want to stack up the most because you have two just inadequate defenses. The Cardinals have just let up a ton of points. It's been comical to this point how bad they've been on defense. And that was after being a really good unit last year. And they only lost 2 playmakers, and that has made all of the difference. I mean, Tyrann Mathieu not being there has made a huge impact, and a few other D linemen out of the mix have made them completely fall apart. Now, on the other side, Seahawks have been a lot better on offense than anybody thought they would. It's a divisional matchup, and their defense has also been extremely porous. I mean, just think about the Lions, right? They absolutely boat raced them. So you're talking about a game that could get to 60 points, 65, 70 actual points. And it's not getting nearly as much ownership as that Chiefs-Bills game. And the Chiefs and Bills have much better defenses than what we have in this game. So it is realistic that even with their quarterback play, right, 2 shootout offenses, that ends up being like a 48-point total, a 50-point total. This, I don't really see that getting to an 80, 90-point total, like a crazy scoring game, unless the defense is just lay over. And the Bills defense is not going to lay over. And the Chiefs defense to this point has also looked a lot better than what they have over the last few years. So this is the game that I think has like the true, like, 80-point total game in it. Like it has legitimately could go way over this 50-point total. So that's why I like it so much. James Conner's out, which opens up all of that room for Benjamin. On the Seattle side, not really that many injuries to worry about. So both of these teams are at full force at this point. Let's look at a few of the plays. Actually, I think Rashad Penny's out at this point. So that opens up, where's Rashad Penny? Yeah, Rashad Penny's out. He broke his leg. I was going to say, is he coming back 2 weeks after breaking his leg? Duh. Absolutely sound like a dumbass saying that. But, Benjamin, you got to love him, right? We talked about him multiple times at this point, $4,600. He's worth the chalk. So he's like one piece of chalk that I just cannot see myself getting off of. DJ Dallas is going to be the backup running back here. And then Walker here, Kenneth Walker the third. He's also worth a few looks. So I wouldn't be against playing both running backs against each other just because of how inefficient both defenses have been. Kyler Murray is going to be in my player pool at quarterback. He's only 8.7% owned. And same thing with Geno Smith. I'm going to be stacking up both offenses, and I'm taking Geno Smith. I love Tyler Lockett. You have to like the situation that he's in there. DK Metcalf makes sense. He's a little bit more expensive, though, now at $6,800. On the other side of things, love Rondale Moore as a value pick, right? He's projecting for over 3x value. He's getting a little bit of ownership, but it makes sense to me. Marquise Brown is one of my favorite plays out there at wide receiver. He's $7,200, so he's expensive. But again, you're paying a premium for some of these top tier games. And if it ends up being just crazy shootout, you're going to have exposure here. I don't care if they're $500 more expensive than they should be at every position. It's going to be well worth paying that. So it's just a game that I'm prioritizing, particularly because, 10.3%, 8.7% here, right? It's not 17% of a Josh Allen. It's not Stephon Diggs being owned at 16% of lineups. It's a lot more reasonable, right? Now, DK Metcalf, if he's going to be 14% owned, at $6,800, I might think twice about it. But somebody like Lockett is just way too cheap at $5,600, like 20%, whatever. I'll eat that sort of chalk, right? So it's a game that's a little bit easier to eat the chalk on, and you can consider taking the tight ends there too. I think they're well within play. Let's move on to, I guess we can talk about the running backs. I mean, we talked about Benjamin. I guess Kenneth Walker we talked about too. Let's move on to the next game. I guess there's nothing really to touch on. Last game though, Bills and Chiefs. 54-point total. I mean, just don't play Josh Allen stacks. I mean, it could get there. He's been unbelievable to this point. It feels like maybe he will just go out there every game and score 30 to 35 fantasy points. It has to stop at some point. Like it's unsustainable, right? But you have to get exposure here. Like we know this is going to be a high scoring game. With Mahomes on one side, Josh Allen on the other side, you have to get exposure here. It's just how you do so, right? For me, Josh Allen, I'm just going to take a stand against him. I mean, he could go out there, score 35 fantasy points, so be it, right? I mean, I guess I'm just hoping at that point that I can get 30 fantasy points from another quarterback, right? That's a little bit cheaper. That's the idea with fading a Josh Allen. But to get exposure here, I'm going to try and do it in a little bit of a clever way. So on the other side of things, I love Travis Kelce. So Travis Kelce as a one-off, I think is a great option. He's $7,800. We saw him score, 4 touchdowns last week, get you a ridiculous score. So sure, he's getting ownership, but he's not mega chalk. He's only 8.4% owned. On the other side of things, Stephon Diggs, right, 16% owned. Sure, Gabe Davis, after his massive performance, is still only 6.1% owned. And going into week 1, remember, he's the one that smashed on opening night, and then he got injured. So no shit, he didn't really do much over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Now that he's back from injury and is back to smashing, if he's going to be way lower owned than Diggs and also a lot cheaper, I'm going to be willing to take Gabe Davis as a one-off. And then the running backs here. People want to play the quarterbacks because it's Mahomes versus Josh Allen, right? But they don't consider that it could be the running game that's putting up all those 50 points, right? That's more than reasonable. Just all it takes is a red zone rush rather than a red zone pass getting into the end zone, right? And that has massive swings on the projected points there. So getting to a CEH, right? $6,300. He's getting no ownership. Oh, Devin Singletary, right? 7% owned. And he's going to get even more of the rushing offense than somebody like a CH because, they have Pacheco over there. They also have Jerick McKinnon, who's going to get targets. Devin Singletary is going to get a huge bulk of that offense, only 7% owned. So I think if anything here, I like taking one-offs like a Travis Kelce, a Gabe Davis, but I love the running backs. They're adequately priced and they're being lower owned than a Breece Hall. Like, are you kidding me? Breece Hall in a losing game script against Green Bay, you're going to own more than Devin Singletary in a 54-point total? Or to give you the same sort of example, right? CEH, right? He's 5 times less owned than, even a Jeff Wilson Jr. who I like. I understand that he's a little bit overpriced here, but it's a 54-point game total. That's implying 4 touchdowns for each team. And with your number one rushing threat, that's projecting for at least 0.7, 0.8 touchdowns, if not more, if you're assuming it's a ceiling performance. So it's just, I think there's enough upside there for the running backs, particularly, 2.3% owned. Well, you play them in 7% of your lineups and you get leverage, 10% if you're feeling a little bit frisky about it. It's not like you're investing very heavily into these players to get the leverage that you need. So definitely guys that I think are in consideration. Josh Allen, right, 17% owned. The Patty Mahomes stack, though, 5.8%, one of my favorite plays on the slate. So if you're going to get exposure here, if you're going to stack up the game, I think the side to stack up is the Kansas City side. You're 100% playing Kelce with him. The issue is trying to find the second player. And perhaps the really sneaky way to do it is maybe to take a CEH. Outside of that, though, Juju Smith-Schuster should be a lot more healthy now that he's had a week to recover. There for that primetime game, he was obviously hampered. I think that's why he had such an inefficient game. So only 8.8% owned. It's actually not that high for the super chalky game. I think you could use him as a stacking option alongside of Travis Kelce. So that's the side I like a little bit more, right? So if you're going to stack up that game, which I'm going to with Patty Mahomes, that's the way that I'd go about it. But I don't know, 17% owned quarterback. I can't do it. It's way too concentrated on one player. And there's plenty of opportunities like a Devin Singletary getting run for him not to get there, right? And, Josh Allen in higher dollar contests might be like 25, 30% owned for all we know, right? These are for large field GPP sort of projections where the ownership is going to be a little bit more spread out than it is for those higher dollar contests. He could be even more chalky than what we're seeing on the spreadsheet here. Let's go ahead and what we're going to do now is head over to the DraftKings before we go ahead and wrap this up. So let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. There we go. And bring up the other tab. There we go. And we're going to talk through a couple builds. So what I want to do here is first off, focus on a large field GPP build. And I'll give you an idea of 2 of the stacks that I was considering. So the first one I want to go through is this Lamar Jackson stack because it was a little bit nuanced, right? I was talking about trying to only take like 3 or 4 players from that game. So I talked about the Lamar Jackson to Andrews connection. And then on the other side, taking a Saquon Barkley. So by doing so, you can see it uses up a lot of our salary. We only have $27,000 remaining, but I do think that each of these 3 players could post you 30 to 40 fantasy points. And if that ends up happening, we saw it with the Dolphins game, right, where Tua went off, same thing with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and they were both relatively expensive. And on the other side, I forget who they were playing that week, but there was another super expensive player that went for like 40 fantasy points. I think it might have been like a Stephon Diggs. you absolutely had to have that week. So it's well within the range of outcomes. So this is the sort of stack, and this is how you'd start that kind of stack. You want a cheap defense, right? So you could go down there, take a gamble that the Steelers defense gets a defensive touchdown. Of course, I'm the homer in me saying that. At tight end, you could find a value tight end to make this sort of lineup work. Cade Otton is a great candidate for that kind of option. Actually, we already have a tight end there. I don't love playing tight ends at flex, so we're going to avoid that. Let's go to wide receiver to find our values. Rondale Moore, you could use Rondale Moore as a one-off, so let's actually just do it this way. Let's see, where's good old Rondale Moore? There he is, $4,200. Another value wide receiver, go with Zay Jones. Zay Jones there. So, we're not going to fill out this entire lineup here, but you're getting the idea, right? So even if you start with a premium stack like a Barkley, Jackson, and Mark Andrews, you have plenty of value options to make it work. And running back, for example, now that Henderson Jr. is going to be the starting running back here, I think that we have to consider him as a value pick at $5,100. There's plenty of options to make that sort of lineup work. So don't feel like those top end stacks, you can't get there. And just to show you the Kansas City stack. So going to a Patty Mahomes at quarterback, let's go ahead and take Travis Kelce there and a Juju. And on the other side, we're going to assume that Devin Singletary is the reason that Josh Allen is not the optimal stack this week and use him as our buyback. And I wouldn't even be against using a multiple buyback. So we're going to use Gabe Davis too. We're going to leverage off of the really popular play, which is using a Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs stack and take the contrarian buyback with this is like a full-on game onslaught, right? So we're taking 5 players from the same game. What else we can do here? Go to defense. We're going to need a cheap defense. Let's go ahead and, I don't know, let's put in it's not a lot of good cheap defenses. Let's put the Steelers in there again. They're a good placeholder. Go to the running back. You put Darrell Henderson Jr., right? We're not always, I just put Benjamin in this one, right? Just we'll use both of the really cheap running backs, right? Because he's even cheaper. He's $4,600. He's $4,800 for your last 2 spots. Like, you can easily make that work, right? You go to wide receiver. I mean, who's a super duper cheap wide receiver you can take? Let's see. Let's go to my projections tab. Let's see what we got. I mean, Rondale Moore is really cheap, but we already used him. I want to get somebody else in there. I guess Alec Pierce, right? I mean, Romeo Dubes, we can go there too, but let's put Pierce in there. All right, so put Alec Pierce at $4,300. You have $5,300 left for your flex, right? It's more than doable. If you want some of these premium stacks, it's not as much of an issue as you think. Now, if you're going for a little bit of a cheaper stacking option, so I did mention a few of them that you could get to earlier. It buys you a lot this week, right? Because of some of the cheaper players out there. Let's just show you what a Kenny Pickett stack looks like. But by the way, guys, I am 100% playing a Kenny Pickett stack. It's probably the worst idea possible. I'm just going to click these in here to show you, how much salary it opens up. Because you could do this with any of the cheap quarterbacks out there. Like Mariota, I like a lot more, right? I'd recommend playing a Mariota stack or a Trevor Lawrence stack that's a little bit cheaper. But just to give you an idea here. So let's go to Titan. Pat Freiermuth is out. Let's put Zach Gentry in there. Can't tell. This isn't a lineup I'd actually enter. And let's put the Giants defense. All right. So by taking this, and we're going to run it back with Lenny Fernet, who I said I just think smashes here. So in this type of lineup, right, rather than having like $4,300 or $4,800 remaining, you have $6,600 remaining. I mean, Cooper Kupp, easy to fit in this sort of lineup, right? Even with running back, if you wanted to take a Nick Chubb, for example, and you really liked him, you liked even at $8,200, you think can get you to 30 fantasy points. It's these cheaper stacks that can get you there, right? It doesn't have to be a Kenny Pickett stack. I was kind of doing that one as a little bit of a joke there. But, if you want to be a little bit more reasonable about it, why not go to a Skylar Thompson, right? So Skylar Thompson has a legitimate chance of playing. You go out here, take Jalen Waddle, who I mentioned I actually like quite a bit. And at tight end, right, you could take Mike Gesicki, who hasn't had the best start to his season, but he's only $3,100, right? That's another way to get to that sort of stack, right? So it's not the Kenny Pickett stack that makes that lineup important. It's more what it buys you elsewhere. So that's all we're going to have for this live stream, boys. That's all I've got. I have some golf to watch here. Golf is about to start here. Last question. Travis says Panthers defense. Yeah, not my favorite pick. So they're super cheap. So they're always worth having in the player pool. It's not my favorite pick, though. I do think that they're going to kind of get it run down their throat with the Rams. So I don't know. I have them at 11.3% right now, Travis. So I guess that's the real X factor. If they come in lower owned, like 5 or 6%, then I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Then you take the shot on the super cheap defense. But if they're going to be chalky, like 11 to 15%, then I don't see it, right? Because I think more often than not, they just get absolutely wiped and they have, a next to zero performance with the defense. But, if we're taking a shot on a low owned defense that's cheap, then I'm always going to be for it. It's just so volatile. But that's all I've got, boys. Hopefully you guys feel a little bit more prepared for this weekend. Going to do this every Friday at 7 p.m. Last week was a little bit busy for me. I was getting some of the setup stuff changed, different computer and whatnot. So I was a little bit thrown off last week. But we're back to normal scheduled programming. If you guys haven't already joined the Patreon, I would highly recommend it. That's how you get access to all of the projections that you saw on the stream and as they update throughout the weekend, right? So, Darrell Henderson's going to go way up in ownership. We already know that. So when that goes up, there's guys that are going to have to go down in ownership, right? And as some of the chalkier players up top get even more chalky, that means we're going to have to compensate elsewhere. So make sure you're a part of that so you get all of those updates. And hopefully we can smash this weekend's slate. So best of luck with all of that, boys. And I'll catch you guys later.